Hi, I'm Melanie Nakabuchi, and I'm going to be reading my final reflective video essay. The quote, "You can leave home all you want, but home will never leave you," said by Sonseria Tate, is exemplified in Jamaica Kincaid's On Seeing England for the First Time. In Kincaid's story, she describes how her experience growing up in Antigua has influenced her view of England for her entire life. Her growing up here had, in a way, forced her to, as a child, internalize cultural racism against her own people, a behavior of all people of the nation of Antigua at the time. The people lost and would refuse to participate in their own culture and desired that of the English, something they did subconsciously because they were colonized by the British. Antigua was colonized by the British from 1632 to 1981. During this time, everything in the country was undoubtedly English. The food, the time they ate, how much they ate, the clothes, how they wore them, and the schools and what they were taught. This influence of England in its entirety was so natural for the Antiguans that many did not notice what it really meant and represented. It was a form of cultural violence, something Kincaid will only realize when grown up. England misled the colonized with prowess. They deceived Antiguans so severely that the natives lost their culture and desired that of the English. This sense of admiration developed as a child for Kincaid, as she was educated in the British colonial system, developed into a hatred for the English. In the short story On Seeing England for the First Time, Kincaid says, "I was thinking, who are these people who forced me to think of them all the time, who forced me to think that the world I knew was incomplete or without substance, or did not measure up because it was not England, that I was incomplete or without substance and did not measure up because I was not English." This shows how home and her views of home influenced her life even after she emigrates from Antigua to the United States, where she lived at the time of writing this story. Throughout the semester, I have grown as a learner in my ability to make a connection to outside influences when reading, as opposed to attempting to interpret the meaning, the theme, or the goal of the text without any historical context, cultural context, or information about the author. I came to understand the true importance behind underlying influences. During my time as a student in multicultural literature, I have been able to acquire knowledge of how to expose myself to as much information as possible, making analyzing the text not only less challenging, but more fulfilling. Exposing the humanity behind the author and exploring what the text means to him or her has allowed me to also make a connection between the author's view of the world and my own. Examining the text in this way has also exposed me to some realities I rarely considered before. When reading A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest J. Gaines, I began to study the severity of racism's prevalence in the United States judicial system during the Jim Crow era. I then began to juxtapose Jefferson's journey to death row with that of the hundreds of men on death row today. Most of these men are black, uneducated, and poor, like Jefferson, and were tried by an all-white jury, which I believe may have ultimately played an integral role in their seemingly inevitable deaths. I wouldn't have been able to analyze A Lesson Before Dying, and consequently wouldn't have been able to scrutinize the broken criminal justice system of the United States without the knowledge of literary analysis I gained in this course. The most important and prevalent concept explored in this semester's discussions was the exploration of the ethics of the death sentence in explaining what exactly constitutes a punishment as cruel and unusual. I believe this discussion was most relevant to me because it's a constant debate between people of all political parties, races, genders, and socioeconomic classes. The United States Constitution declares heinous punishments illegal, stating cruel and unusual punishment shall not be inflicted. This raises the question of who decides what is cruel or unusual. Do a group of mostly white men elected to the United States Supreme Court decide? Does the judge involved in said case decide? And why isn't the opinion of the punished considered at all? These are perplexing conclusions to come to, because it's difficult to not see it on a case-by-case basis. Does a mass murderer deserve to die if he committed these homicides because of a mental illness? And does a man deserve to be indicted and sentenced to death based upon circumstantial evidence? These are the questions one must consider, and even then, the burden is immense. And as unethical as it is for a man to have his life taken from him, as a punishment, I also find it unethical to put the burden of killing a man on anyone, whether I state this opinion in behalf of an impartial, anonymous jury or an experienced, renowned judge. The life or death of an accused criminal almost seems to be treated as a trivial matter, and the life of a black man worthless. As of January 1st, 2016, 2,943 people have been sentenced to death, and jurors are 4.5 times more likely to impose a sentence of death when the defendant is black than they are in cases involving white defendants accused of similar crimes. 80% of the cases submitted by the federal prosecutors for death penalty review in the past 5 years have involved racial minorities as defendants. In more than half of those cases, the defendant was black. This is indisputably an issue which is a reflection of not only the criminal justice system of the United States, but is an indicator of how prevalent and alive racism is. Potential jurors in these cases go through extensive questioning in regards to their biases in support or opposition of the death penalty. Those interviewed are typically ordinary citizens with no tie to any anti-black associations or pro-death penalty groups. Regardless of this, jurors are more likely to impose a death penalty on a black man than a white man, which I believe is attributed to the systematically enforced idea that black people, especially men, are dangerous. This idea is enforced, often subliminally, in television, magazines, in classrooms, and even amongst peers. The debate of the death penalty is more than a question of whether or not it is cruel or unusual, or ethical or unethical. It is a question that cannot be answered until the system is fair and standardized. A climate of black inferiority has existed in the United States since its establishment, and today I think we fail to address this problem as directly as we should, because we like to think that since segregation is over, racism is as well. I believe that those who disagree with me are attempting to ignore the prospect of their actions one day reflecting their underlying racism because they don't want to appear to be a bad person. Because of this, they deny the existence of the issue entirely. From personal experience, I feel that many white people feel a sense of guilt in acknowledging that they or their family members could be in the position of deciding a black man or even a white man's fate without even realizing, choose based upon the man's race. I don't believe this is necessarily a reflection of their character, but is more a reflection of society as a whole. I believe we are a product of our environment, and addressing the issues and truly acknowledging them is the only way to break this seemingly never-ending cycle. Outside of the classroom, I will continue to interpret things in context, whether that be in literature, music, or situations I am presented with in life. Analysis is an integral step in understanding, and practicing analysis allows one to expose themselves to the way the world is viewed through another's eyes. This exposure helps one become a more well-rounded, intelligent person, allowing one to unveil their own educated interpretation of the world around them. Thank you.